All right, so when I developed this program last week, I built in a section on defining transparency. And as I was putting together this PowerPoint presentation yesterday, I was thinking, why the heck did I give myself that job? Because I don't know that I can answer the question. But I think, and the reason that is that when we talk about transparency and open government, there are so many different things that are going, there are so many opportunities, there are so many different types of tools that you can use in open government. People are interested in the topic for a very wide range of reasons, from wanting to stick it to the government to being really collaborative in their orientation. It's a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and for that reason I think that's one of the reasons why we struggle with the concept. Now, our goal in organizing this summit is to start sharing some examples from other communities who are practicing the type of openness that we can aspire to. So that's what we're going to go through today, and that we'll be developing in the breakout sessions tomorrow. I will say, I think in trying to answer this question, one thing that's important to recognize is I think the impulse for open government comes from the reality that most citizens feel very disconnected, whether they know it or not, from the work that their government does. They don't understand what services they provide. They don't understand really what the work of their leadership does in communities. And the call for openness is really a call to start bridging that divide. People, I think there's two themes that come up a lot. First, an interest in knowing what your government is actually doing. So knowing the details of processes. So be it procurement, for example, which was something that got us into a lot of dysfunction in that system, is what was largely a problem with our past leaders. We want to understand that system is working well now. And so having a more intimate knowledge of the process of procurement as citizens allows us to hold our government accountable. On the other hand, there's work that the government does that I think we don't want to know. What we want to know is that there are capable people doing it. And so that's more an issue of trust than simply just opening up the process to people. We want to open up the people to people, if that makes sense. And then the last thing I want to say on this kind of overarching piece is, so I went to the third of County Executive Fitzgerald's town halls yesterday, and it was at the Natural History Museum. He's done 3, and I very much admired the interest in doing a town hall and the idea of taking it on the road so that it's in people's communities and people can have access in their neighborhoods to their elected officials. So I want to thank his team for coordinating those. There was a gentleman who made a comment at the town hall yesterday, and the first thing he started out with was, County Executive Fitzgerald, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I want you to know, based on what I've seen here today, that I'm very comfortable with you leading our county. And it was a very humble compliment, I thought, but I think that feedback speaks very specifically to what we're trying to accomplish here. And as much as it's about opening data and changing the technology that we're using, a lot of this is about what can we do to help people build some faith in the leadership that happens in our community, and how can we develop a system that makes people feel like those safeguards in place if their leadership goes astray. So it's just something to think about. In another effort to organize this very grand concept of open government, this might be a little difficult to read, but this image is also in people's workbooks. I've created a chart that breaks down some of the main processes and tools that fall into this broad concept of open government. One of the big chunks on the left there is availability and accessibility of information. So that's making sure that records are open, that people can get them. as much as possible that they're available online, or and one of the values of that is that people don't need to. The window of accessing information isn't only between 9 to 5 at a place that's 20 miles from where you live. So that's one part of what accessibility is. Accessibility can even mean that if you have information on your website, that it's easy for people to find. Very simple things. Open data is about, as the community is a major aggregator of information about the residents that live here and the work that they do. Information is power, as we all know, and if the government when governments become more efficient in capturing that data and in publishing it and making it accessible, it opens up a range of opportunities for analyzing that data, identifying trends, and building solutions that are based in research. I think capitalizing on the information that's gleaned from data is a responsibility of governments. It is likewise a responsibility of citizens and other organizations. And so when we talk about open data, a big part of that is, if the government makes their information more available and accessible, other organizations can step in and use that to do their jobs better as well. We also have public participation in decision making, which is about feeling like that it's about citizens being able to participate in the decisions that affect their lives. Pretty obvious. And then also implementation of solutions. So I think part of this thirst and hunger that I'm seeing is, and that I think we all understand and see in ourselves and in our neighbors, is that there's an interest in wanting to solve problems of our lives and our residents and our neighbors. Councilman Dave Greenspan spoke to this a little bit when he was talking about how can we make a more welcoming culture. If you look at why people stay in communities or feel committed to communities, one of the biggest things that can tie someone to the community they live in is the feeling that what they do makes a difference there. So by creating opportunities for people to participate in the decision making and implement solutions, we're going to get that type of investment and support that we're looking for. I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more depth and highlight some pilot projects that we weren't able to highlight in our guest speakers today. So availability and accessibility of information. I think the town halls are a great way of putting people in neighborhoods and giving people access to their elected officials. Using information, making sure that the language that's used to describe them is stuff that people can actually read. Defining acronyms, having a cheat sheet of words on websites when material is presented. For example, we use procurement for one of our breakout groups. To be quite honest, I didn't know entirely what that meant when I started that, when I first discovered the term, and I'm certainly not the only one. So that's one opportunity that we could use to define and make the work that government does a little more penetrable. Visuals of data, there's a lot that you can do to turn information that's in a spreadsheet into a pie chart. And it's amazing how much more penetrable that makes that information. Before I go there, there's a project I wanted to highlight that's not on this slide. It's a school board that speaks to the issue of availability and accessibility. There's a school board in Albemarle County, Virginia, that was having kind of chronic issues with the public second-guessing their budget decisions. And they decided to use a technology that allowed them to send out calls in a massive reverse dial to every citizen in their county, in their school district, to join a conference call where they could participate in the budget meetings that their school board was conducting. And so you would get a call. A person living in that community would get a call, would say, "You've been invited to join the Albemarle School Board budget meeting. Please stay on the line if you'd like to participate." And then there's a series of instructions. If you have a question, you get entered into a queue, and there's an operator that takes your question and then would queue you to actually make that question available to the counselors that are there. And this was an NPR piece. This is how I heard about this. The woman that they interviewed said, you know, this is great. I have always been interested in what my school board was doing, but there's no way that I can make a 7 o'clock meeting. That's when things are exploding in my house. And so she's able to put her phone on speaker, the call on speakerphone while she's cooking dinner for her kids. She can ask questions while she's making dinner. And while they had 100 people showing up at the meetings where they announced their budget, Albemarle School District now has 1,500 people that are participating in those calls every meeting. They don't do every meeting with a reverse dial, but they do all the important ones. So that's a pretty cool example. Another example of availability and accessibility, the Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood, has a blog that he monitors and adds to. It's called the Fastlane. And he just publishes blog posts about the work that he's doing. The last time I checked this, there was a piece about the new Miss America has taken on teen texting as her kind of political cause. So it's a way, what this does is it humanizes the people that are making decisions in our government. And to this, you know, if our grand goal is to enhance people's trust in the leadership of our elected officials, that's a really helpful way to do it. Another example of availability and accessibility is Utah's website. You see here, this doesn't look a ton like a lot of other websites that you can see. When you log onto it, it's a very simple page, and there's just a search bar in the middle. And they developed this site based on research that they'd done with their citizens, who said that they found it difficult to find the information that they were looking for on their state website, that it was much easier for them to just enter what they were looking for. So the way that this site works, this is just an image, but it auto-completes too. So if I was interested in, you know, car registration, it would start filling that in as soon as I typed it, and then would give me a bunch of different options related to that topic. Very clean. What's interesting about this is the idea that you can use information about, governments can use information about how citizens are using their services and tailor services in a way that respond to the needs of citizens. This is a great example of that. Another example of availability and accessibility, I wanted to highlight this project. It was spawned by an interest in promoting education and educating people about health practices in the Black community that was disproportionately affected by diabetes and heart disease. And after doing some research, they learned that barbershops were a community meeting. They were a central community place where information could be disseminated easily. And so they actually brought this program to barbershops and disseminated their information that way. This is a program that was in Chicago. It's called Black Barbershop, the Black Barbershop. So it's just an example of how a little receptiveness to how people actually live their lives and shaping programs based on that information can totally change the effectiveness of government outreach. The next is open data. Organization I wanted to highlight that does some pretty amazing work. There are many of them in the limited research I've done. There's a good one to highlight. Community Research Partners is an organization based in Columbus, and give you an idea of what open data actually means. This is a third-party nonprofit organization. They harvest data from the Franklin County, from the City of Columbus, from United Way, and they basically mash it all together. And then the work that their organization does, in addition to putting that information, is issue reports at the request of governments and community members to give them information that's useful for the work that they need to do. You know, an example of this is one indicator of poverty, for example, is water shutoffs. And that's a set of data that's coming from the water department. that can be used for a community organizing group to determine where greatest needs are. And you have, there are dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of indicators that we can dig out of the information that's coming from governments. And the request for open data from governments is about making that information available and accessible so that other groups can step in and help our communities get better. The governments are just such a huge aggregator of information that to have them not participating in the consolidation of data is a huge loss. We're going to skip these other examples right now. Implementation of solutions. There's a group in Chicago that is called the Civic Consulting Alliance. And that's a nonprofit organization that basically brings on citizen fellows who submit proposals based on their areas of specialty. And one of the work that the organization does is pair them with appropriate government counterparts to actually implement those projects. And so it's, what I think is special about this project is that it really taps citizens as experts in a broad variety of fields. We're certainly experts at being citizens as well, but we have a lot more to offer our communities than just commentary. And moving towards a relationship of trust, I think, is going to require engaging the diverse talents that people bring to the table. One theme that's come up with County Executive Fitzgerald and with Councilor Greenspan is, how much we can trust that this movement here is actually gonna stay, and the way that we deal with that is by institutionalizing a lot of this work. One way we can do that is talk about not writing out acronyms. CVOs is a term for a Chief Volunteer Officer. Several county, if not dozens of county governments have implemented this position. And it's basically someone that works at a senior level within the administration to identify volunteer opportunities across government agencies and plug people into those jobs. So one example is guardian ad litems. That's a role that volunteers can do, and also like victim counselors or victim advocates. The budgets for those programs are very large, and you can significantly reduce the cost of some of those human service services by incorporating volunteers. And then the last is decision making. I think a good example of this is the foundation here is that citizens are experts at being citizens. When it comes to stuff like a website, for example, which we'll be bringing up a lot because IT is pretty central to a lot of this work, citizens are experts at how they use websites, and so there is significant value to be gained by incorporating citizens into the process as these solutions are implemented, so that they're developed with consideration for how they're going to be used. The other thing that example that I'd raise is that of town halls, and in the conversations that I've had with several government officials as this process has gone on is, they're as frustrated as anybody that no one shows up to these meetings. And how can we talk about a participatory democracy when no one's showing up? And what I would, certainly I don't think that the answer to that question definitely does not fall entirely on government. But what I would push our government officials to do, as well as the rest of our community, is ask the question, why aren't people showing up? And I think there are some philosophical democratic issues at play there that might be a little impenetrable. But a lot of it is, I have to cook dinner at 7 o'clock for my kids, and I can't make a meeting then. So if we start exploring some of the factors that are contributing to this decline in public participation, and the Cleveland Coalition and our other people that are involved here today, I know are willing to be partners in that effort. I think we can begin to make some real progress on identifying what some of these barriers are and pushing through them. The other is the casino example. The Cleveland Coalition, one of our first projects, was focused on the casino that was moving into downtown Cleveland. And this is a much longer conversation, but I think basically it can be summed up by saying that the expertise and organization that we brought to the table in this project, and you can ask any of us who are here more about it if you're interested, it was a missed opportunity that the recommendations we developed were not more fully implemented. And we're used to that, but we should not be. So hopefully by engaging this process over the next couple days, we can start to talk about how can we develop capacity within government that it can better incorporate decisions or insight and resources that citizens bring to the table. Lastly, I think the reason I like this visual and wanted to use it is that this idea of traditional accountability becomes much smaller when you develop more robust programming in these other areas. And I think probably the easiest way to think of that is that this concept of gotcha accountability it becomes is minimalized relative to the other opportunities there are for public engagement. That said, I don't think the right to information is very important, and we have several groups that are dedicated to making sure we have the legislation in place and the standards that guarantee our rights to the information we need to hold our governments accountable. But I think this movement more largely is about just changing the experiences of government more broadly. And that is the end of my presentation. So